Alex, I always wondered, though, out of the polyhedral dice, what's your favorite one?
Out of all the polyhedral dice?
Yeah, polyhedral dice.
Uh,
How many sides you want?
D100, but on a single dice.
Oh, yeah. I love those. I've actually been looking at a couple of those.
Is that technically a polyhedral?
Yes, 100-sided polyhedral. It just looks round.
That aside.
Yes.
D8s are pretty nice.
D8s? I like D8s.
D12s are pretty nice.
They're very stocky. We found that out. Great if you're a dwarf.
Favorite shape? Probably D12.
Yeah, D12.
Because it's got the hexagon sides. It's just nice.
It certainly is. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, that might actually come up a little bit later. But in the meantime, welcome to Total Pebble Knockdown. I am Nathan.
And I am Alex.
And welcome to the show. First up, we actually do have some Dungeons and the Dragons to discuss.
But the dragon might not be in the dungeon.
The dragon might be in here.
In your heart?
In my heart.
That's for the people watching at home.
Yes. I just thought it might make them want to watch the video too. But it's fine. You can... Anyway, I am putting a hand over my heart to say that the dragon might have been inside of us the whole time.
Sounds like a polymorph self-spell.
Yeah. You know what? That actually will probably become relevant in a minute too. But we're going to be doing a crit think because Alex, you and I have been actually playing D&D in real life.
We have been.
You have been running a game for your son and for our illustrious graphic design person.
Our brand director.
Our brand director, yes.
As we call her.
Who does all of the things you see, basically. Teaching them the system.
Yes, because they're new. Mm-hmm. They've never played before. This is their first D&D game. So I picked up I think I mentioned before, I picked up the D&D Essentials kit, not the starter. It's not the pre-generated characters. They can make their own characters, and here's a adventure to get you up to level 9, maybe. 9. Something like that.
Okay, yeah. Well, that makes sense. I think you said that there were 9 adventures or something.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Anyways,
not really important, but
yeah.
But yeah, basically starter adventure pack so that you can kind of get used to the mechanics. Do they start you out at level 1?
Yeah. You joined us a little ways in. They've already done several quests.
Good.
So I think your character's level 2? 3? You're 3.
I'm 3.
Yeah. The first 3 quests they did got them a level.
Okay.
Or the first 2 of the quests, because they're level 3 and they start at level 1. So.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So that makes sense. Good. And what is the module called?
Icespire Peak.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I know that there was a dragon on the cover.
Yeah, it's a cryovane.
It's a cryovane, and
that's
means...
the dragon's name.
Cryovane. And cryovane breathes ice.
He's a white dragon.
Yes. Well, that's good.
Anyways, we've been playing this. I have not DM'd in several years. And I have also never run a module that someone else written before.
Yes. So, the first question, well, I think we actually have a couple things.
We have a few things to talk about.
A few things to talk about in that. We have one kind of character development stuff that I wanted to discuss, but also, before we get into that, I'm curious about how the modules work for you. As opposed to you used to homebrew a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So how's that change?
It's a bit different. If I were to be prepping a bit more, I think it would not be quite as different because I could just do some work and try and figure things out on my own too to add to it. But I'm trying to just kind of do with what's written. So it's a little different than brewing my own campaign because one of the things I have an issue with is NPCs. They've got kind of a small blurb occasionally about what the character might be like or what they look like, but it doesn't really tell me anything or give me any other information they might know or their personality, for instance. So it's hard for me to roleplay out an NPC if I'm not familiar with them at all. It's like, okay, well, what do I want to make them aside from a standard NPC that's kind of like, oh, okay, sure. Like the kings in that you guys just did, I kind of was like, well, this guy's supposed to be a little bit crazy, so let's make him sound a little nuts.
Sure.
Little paranoid, if you will.
Yeah.
But like other NPCs, I'm just like, I have no idea what to do for this NPC.
Yeah,
you know?
I could tell that you were having a little bit of an issue just because when you get into the book, they kind of tell you the names of the characters, but...
And that's it.
Not really even like a script of the dialogue or anything, just kind of like, you know, the general idea of what's going on.
There's a couple pieces there where it'll be like, oh yeah, if you guys had gone up to the door and knocked on the king's chamber, he would talk to you through the door and be like, yeah, I won't come out unless you kill the shape changer. Spoilers. But you know, there's a few things like that, like the town master. If you go to he'll only talk through door 2 and he'll slip the gold pieces underneath the door one by one to give you your payments for the quest. And it gives a little bit like that, but there's not a whole lot to flesh it out.
Fair enough.
Which I guess is fine. You don't want to take people that are really new and give them too much.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
But other times, you know, I'm looking through this and the rooms in the dungeons and in the places you're at don't have a lot of description to them.
Oh, okay.
Which, again, is fine for a lot of cases. It's like, yeah, it's a nondescript room in a cave.
Yeah.
But, like, if you're not going to have something interesting in the room, or at least visually interesting in a room, I think it's a little bit of a waste to be like, yeah, there's a room.
Enjoy.
There's nothing in the room. Okay, well, why is this a separate, like, entry in here then? Why is it not just a hallway?
Right. I had all these rooms I populated with nothing.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. It's like, someone would be like, yeah, there's a dresser and nothing to make it, I guess, look like it was lived in.
Sure.
But I think in the case that you do that, you could be like, it's got like a dresser and maybe a shelf and like have a little blurb that's like, it looks like a bedroom that is disused and has been long abandoned type thing.
Sure.
Give a little blurb. That way you can just be like, okay, well, this is kind of just a set piece.
Yeah.
You know, gives you a feeling, but doesn't give you anything to work with. Like, if you search the drawers, maybe you find like a couple scraps of paper.
Sure.
That are just nonsense. Because you don't want to make players think that the room is important when it's not.
Right.
But you also don't want them to be like, well, this is stupid.
No, preferably no. You might have noticed, like, maybe just because I've done this a few times, I would ask a lot of times, like, is there a door? Should I check the door? Can I check for traps? Because I kept thinking to myself, in starter adventures, if you're trying to get people used to the system, you might want to give them the heads up pretty early on. Things might be trapped.
Well, at the same time, you don't want to also, like, you don't want to give new players the expectation that every room is trapped.
Everything is trapped, yeah.
So, generally, in that case, where it was like, no, I was kind of going, no, I'll let you know if I need you to make a check for anything, like, specifically. Or I'll ask if there's something you want to do in the room, like, did you want to search the room or whatever that. I'll kind of prompt that.
Sure.
Because then it's not like, you enter a room, cool, I search it, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, there's nothing here. You can take a few minutes if you want, but there's absolutely nothing in this room.
Sure.
Like, I don't want you guys wasting your time searching a room that is actually empty.
Yeah. It's kind of it just totally bogs down and just stops the game entirely.
Yeah, it's not even like your characters would probably do it, but you can just kind of be like, hey, can we search a room? Be like, okay, yeah. You guys, I'm like, don't roll for it. You search a room, you take 20 minutes, you kind of do a quick thing and there's nothing.
Mhm.
You know, something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like you don't want the players wasting their in-game time or their like the session time doing
Right.
something that's useless.
Right. Right.
That's why it's if there's a I think the general rule is if there's not a chance of failure or success,
Sure.
then don't roll for it.
Right.
So like if there's not an outcome that's based on chance, don't roll.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I understand. To actually pose the question for you is, do you think that there are things that were beneficial to you having had experience with the game and having run games before that you were able to utilize even though it's a pre-made module?
Probably. I can bend the rules a little bit where I see fit, like, you know, if I want to be able to give you items that aren't in the module for any instance, or if I want to modify things that are in there slightly, I can do that. Like, when you guys were killing the mimic and my son actually murdered it on his turn, but I was like, all right, well, it's Nathan's turn next, and I want to see what he does.
Right.
So you did that, and you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna stab it because it doesn't want to do anything with my spells, and you know, went up and you stabbed it with your rapier, and you went basically into its mouth, and then it just kind of like died around you with it in its mouth.
Disgusting. I love it.
Disgusting, but it was kind of like I wanted to do that as like a set piece, and I wasn't sure what you were gonna do, but it's like,
yeah,
I didn't want to, because my son had the tendril attached to his chest because he had gotten the adhesive to it, and he cut the tendril, and I was like, well, it's kind of a lame way to like kill it,
right?
You know, that's not a very like if he had just stabbed it outright, I'd be like, yeah, you stab it and
Would it be amazing if I had just tried Vicious Mockery one more time?
And then it just died.
And it got insulted and just like, fine, I'm dead now.
Right, and we're like, it would have been like, oh no, my heart. I would have had a talk that one time.
Yeah, probably not because like I failed the first 2 times I tried Vicious Mockery.
Yeah, you definitely made those saves.
Yeah.
But like at the same point too, where you know I had forgotten kind of the stuff about the mimic, and I had to go back through it. Where you guys had gone through that part of the dungeon the first time, where the mimic was in the room with you.
Oh yeah.
You know. And you're like, I had specifically asked you, because you were looking at the barrels, and the other players, like if they wanted to check them out, which ones they wanted to check out and whatnot. And you had only gone over to the ones in the corner, and not the ones on the wall. Right. And then when you went through, you looked, but the mimic wasn't there. Actually, you should have probably noticed that there was a barrel missing. Now that I think of it, I didn't think of it then, but...
Right.
You know, I had the mimic basically taking the form of a chest in a room that didn't have a chest in it before, but you guys didn't really pay attention to that room aside from what was going on with the ballista.
I was more interested in the, that room, and then when it got to the wine, I was more interested in the wine part.
Yeah, so you weren't, like, taking... If you had, like, gone through and, like, if you guys had... Nice. If you guys... She got a cat in her lap.
Perfect.
Perched. Anyways, if you guys had like moved the barrels around or investigated them a lot more closely or like touched them, you know, it would have been different. Because if you had touched the mimic, you would have stuck to it. Which is why when Ray's character touched it, her hand was suddenly stuck to it. Because she went to open it, and it's like, oh, and now surprise, it bites you.
Right. Now, to be fair, that was not for lack of trying to discover that it was indeed a mimic, because I do remember that our friendly neighborhood rogue, your son, did try to shoot an arrow at it, and it didn't do anything. And I did try Vicious Mockery on it to see if I could damage it at all, and that didn't happen. So we did take a couple precautions before we approached it.
So the funny part is, you know, if I wanted to extend it a little bit, I probably would have swapped it right then and there and made it somewhere else in the dungeon.
Sure.
Because if he had done that and you had done that, and I was like, well, they think it's a mimic, and it is a mimic, that's one thing. But if they think it's the mimic and it's really just a chest, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you're like, oh, we're gonna shoot it. Oh, I'm gonna insult it with a spell. Oh, I'm gonna open it. Oh, it's actually chest to chest full of clothing. All right, well, that was dumb. We feel stupid now.
Until it turns out the mimic was one of the pieces of clothing.
Until the
And
mimic turns
that's
out to be the clothing in the chest.
the
Yeah,
mimic is the clothing in the chest.
that would have been great.
Yeah. You put the
one of the
chest,
things-
you put the shirt on. The
Yeah, you
mimic
put the shirt
comes
on.
alive.
It's you. Jeez.
You were
So one of the
mimic.
things, too with that, as well as you noticed, was you were kind of mapping that dungeon.
Trying to.
Trying to, which again would have worked with graph paper, but I found it a lot easier later to just have the map printed out, because I'm like, all right, you guys have pretty much seen this entire dungeon. Here's like the map printed out in front of you, so you can backtrack and have it there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to look at. I think that was a lot easier because then you don't have to be like, all right, we want to go back. I'm like, I don't have to ask you which direction. I can be like, do you want to go here or to here? That is so much, I think, more convenient.
Sure.
Because then it's like, all right, I don't have to like describe the corner as much for you. And I think for new players, that's probably a bit more helpful, especially if you don't have like specific descriptions in there,
Mm.
you know?
Oh yeah.
So that's one of those things too, where I think going forward, if I make a campaign and it has a dungeon, I'm going to like make a map for it or
Got
have
it.
a map for it of some sort.
Mhm.
And those are definitely all things that I've noticed while doing it that I can take forward if I make another campaign and be like, all right, well, these are some things that I learned from reading a module and playing a module and running it, to kind of that I would like to improve on.
Sure. That makes sense. The other question that I had when I actually did see the map is, and I don't want to slight the people that made the module, but how do they design these things? Like Gnomengard is like I don't know why the gnomes would have built this that way. It
No, we
seems
had
very-
a whole discussion about dungeon design before.
Yeah. How did we get lost in this dungeon? I think I understand now because I was very confused as to the design decisions.
I think that's a cave system. So like if you're going with natural cave systems, then you know you're kind of just
Yeah.
expanding rooms that already exist, but not really changing the architecture of the inside.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, when you actually looked at the map of the Gnomengard, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like an ant colony. The way that
Yeah.
it was like expanded out to certain chambers that just had like it had like little rows that go over to another one, and maybe that's what they were thinking, is that they're just trying to tunnel in and excavate
Yeah.
areas as it
But
was.
like in man-made dungeons
Mm-hmm.
type things, and we've talked about this again, it feels a little different. I think
Yeah.
caverns and caves are different than dungeons and structures.
Yeah, I can understand a cave would be like a natural formation, so it wouldn't
I
necessarily.
always that brings me back to like Diablo 2, where
Oh,
you
yeah.
go into the monastery and it's like these long hallways with nothing around them,
Yeah.
and then goes all over the place, and you're like, who would build this like this?
No, they wouldn't.
No,
No.
you would not. Diablo 3 did a lot better job with the dungeons being
Sure.
compacted and
Mhm.
like actually a structure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of those things that we've talked about. And if you want to go back into our archives, if you haven't listened to that, we did a whole segment about dungeon design and who the hell built these.
Yeah, I think
believe.
I think that was also a crit thing. So
Probably.
if you're looking at this playlist, chances are it's in there from one of the early ones. So that's good. Glad that you've been able to kind of like work your way around a pre-made module, because I know that that's kind of a new thing for you.
Yeah, again, it's definitely showing me things that are helpful
Mhm.
and things that I would do differently if I were to write my own
Sure.
to make it a little bit more accessible and easier to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So now player aspect. Talk a little bit about that. So I wanted to create a character. I'll tell people a little bit about what I'm doing for Max. When you asked if I wanted to maybe come in and talk a little bit, add a little bit maybe to character design or development, just like build out the characters a little bit more?
Yeah, so I asked you if you want to play because I figured it would be helpful to have another person that knows the game a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody that would be better at the roleplay aspect and the in-character stuff, because you've done
Sure.
that a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
to help them kind of be more comfortable trying to play in character and do
Sure.
those role-playing aspects as well.
Yeah. So
Plus,
yeah,
then you get into game and I have another player. So.
that is helpful. Yeah, you originally planned on having some other players, but that didn't seem to pan out. So
Yeah, and then my character
Possible.
is just kind of to fill the party out a bit, to have another character that can help with tasks and things.
right.
Just kind of to balance it out, but he's not much for talking.
No, he's a very silent ranger.
Any characters I make as a DM that are there to help the party,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the strong silent type.
Yeah, fair enough. It is a little bit tricky when you're trying to just rely on like one or two characters to be the party, because you don't have a lot of like movement that you can do if you get it. If one person gets like, if you only had the two players, it was just the two of them. You have your rogue and your fighter, and they got into that mimic fight, and one of them has their hand now attached to the thing. Your options are a little limited.
Yeah.
Even if the mimic had less hit points, it was, it would still be very limiting. So the question that I had to ask myself, because we did want to really teach them the game and kind of get them acclimated to it more than anything, is, okay, so what am I going to play? Because we have a rogue and we have a fighter, and then you were going to play a ranger. And then I had to think to myself, well, if it was just me building a character, I'd probably end up making another damn monk. but realistically, that's not going to be very, good for the party that you're building, because I'm just going to go up and hit everything a million times.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what I'm going to do, because I like doing that. And I played melee characters in the past, and I thought, well, if we're doing a challenge for me, I'm not really schooled on spellcasters in general, and if I'm going to take something that's built for support, I think I'm probably going to go with a bard, and I'm going to do College of Lore. So that was pretty much what I built. And then when I tried to think about what I would do for a character, my basic thought was it would be kind of fun if I was like an aging rock star, and I was a little rock gnome that has had a lot of hits back in the day and hasn't aged very well, but he's just playing these taverns to like crowds of no one, and that would be a fun thing for me to do, and I can also get used to the actual spell casting part, because bards do have some that are helpful, and a lot of support skills.
Right, bards are jack of all trades, master of
Yeah, you could probably, you can build a lot of character classes out in a lot of different ways, but bards do have a lot of options that are for benefiting and buffing parties.
Yeah.
So I thought that I would actually try to focus on that. Some healing, some like inspiration, bravery, and stuff like that. But when I was in the process of that, and I was kind of hearing them talk about some of the backstory that they gave characters, I realized, besides the whole thing where he's been a bard for a really long time, I didn't really know what the backstory kind of like was. And I realized I had kind of painted myself into a corner. So I think I've figured out a way to get myself out of that corner. So I want to brainstorm with you here, because I like this idea, but I want to know what you have to think. So as player to GM, this is what I'm thinking. So this was the conundrum I had for my character. I'm a bard that's been a bard, like a professional bard, for 300 years. Okay? That's like my profession. And I still have my starting equipment, and I can't cast better than second level spells.
Okay, well, I think there's a difference between a musician and a bard.
Okay. but I'm kind of going with the idea that he's been like a bard. Like he's really been a bard. Like, to be the rock star, he had to like still do adventures so that he had material. So that he could
so you're
write his
thinking
songs.
he's done 300 years of failed checks.
300 years of failed checks. I had a more interesting idea though. I had a really interesting idea for what would be going on. So, what if it were like a Dread Pirate Roberts situation?
Oh no.
Where it turns out that the Max Jaguar you're meeting is like the 12th iteration of the original Max Jaguar. And what happens is, the original Max Jaguar, who was a rock gnome bard, just like, who looked exactly the way the current one does.
So he's just passing it down his family line?
Like basic, well, not even his family line, but
I think it'd be funnier if it was his family line and you just happen to be like Max Jaguar the 23rd.
The 23rd.
Yeah.
Here's what I was thinking of originally, is that you have Max, who was a rock gnome bard, and he did College of Lore, and he specifically played the Yarding and the Zulkun, which are the instruments that I have with me. And he got tired of doing the rock star life at a certain point, even though he was at the height of his career. And so he said to himself, well, I've gotten to such a level that I can actually do like a polymorph, almost like a ritual, to like pass his visage and his entire, like, who he is, and pass it on to somebody. And so took on an apprentice. And I kind of had the idea that the apprentice doesn't even need to be a gnome. Doesn't really need to be any particular thing, because they're going to inherit it all, basically, from the last one, so that you can retire. And because of that, so the apprentice comes in, they perform like this ceremony, essentially, where you polymorph into Max, and then when you get to be to a level where you can actually pass it on, you could revert back to who you were, and the next one to take it up can actually take on the lineage of Max.
So it's actually like just the music instruments that are passed down, and his essence goes with them.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I figured it out for you, Nathan.
Okay.
How about
Hmm.
the person that is actually the Max Jaguar isn't like the PC,
Okay.
but the set of equipment is like intelligent.
Oh.
And like takes control of the humanoid.
Oh, okay.
So your character isn't really important, but like the music instruments are basically possessing the character.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they just kind of get passed whenever they find someone else more suitable, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna pass ourselves to this guy.
Oh, okay. That would be interesting, actually, because that would make sense. Because I started to think to myself, well, that would actually be really useful, because it makes sense why he doesn't seem like he's very good at anything, because he's probably only actually been in this form for like a couple years, maybe, and just going around playing these different, I kind of figured that it would always be a bard, but besides that, there were no criteria for who it might pick.
So, the previous iteration of Max was dying somehow.
Sure.
And this was the only person that the intelligent items could inherit.
Yeah.
Or to possess.
Yeah.
So they went from like having a skilled musician who could use them properly, and like somebody that like actually had the dexterity and like the capabilities.
Sure.
To just this shitty rock gnome.
Right. I was thinking, though, I don't know if he was even a rock gnome to start with.
Oh, no, he probably didn't have to be. It's probably just been passed down like folklore.
Yeah, exactly. And so I keep thinking to myself, I think I technically have 2 instruments, like I was mentioning, but I'm proficient in 3. And so the other thing that I'm actually proficient in is a war gong.
A war gong.
A war gong.
Ooh. So, what you're thinking is...
That's what he used to play before this whole thing happened.
So, I was thinking later on you find the war gong of Max Jaguar.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
suddenly your bardic ability becomes
Oh,
greater.
yeah. If I find the actual war gauntlet, like that was lost 3
Yeah.
iterations ago or something,
Something
like
like
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be interesting.
And then it's like, oh, it's the Lost Wargong of Max Jaguar.
Oh, yeah.
And it, like, suddenly, like, you get an additional bardic inspiration dice and proficiency or something like that. It's like,
cool.
I'm complete. The set is back together.
The set has been completed.
The band is back together.
The band is back together. Congratulations.
It's like, oh, you're so shitty because you're missing your third piece. You're missing part of your soul.
Maybe the like the real heavy like thunder magic that he has, or like the earth magic that he doesn't use right now, was the gong, was the war drum, because you have to beat on it. Because I did kind of imagine, I think this is kind of how bards are supposed to work, is that the musical instruments are sort of where the magic kind of comes.
It can be the focus. I mean, bards can use their voice as a performance piece.
Oh, sure.
Like, you don't have to use an instrument. You can be like, yeah, I sing.
Yeah, I kind of figured, like, for different things, like, if you're using inspiration, or you're using vicious mockery or anything like that, it's probably you talking. But when it came to like thunder spells, I figured that's almost like him taking the little portable organ and just like doing a riff on the thing and then just hitting all the buttons at once, and it blasts out the thunder magic to them.
It'd be great the vocal with an instrumental vicious mockery that is just boom. Just a rim shot.
Maybe when he gets the war drum, I don't know. But then I thought like things like sleep are probably when he gets the guitar and he does like a soothing lull. Yeah, and that lulls them into the false sense of security, I guess. But maybe I can actually, if I ever find the war drum and I gain some levels, I'll just
transform you into a half elf at that point.
Oh, perfectly. Well, I kind of had an idea that maybe before this whole thing happened, maybe he was like a wood elf, and that's like they came across him, and when he was like in the forest or something like that, and he was just like playing around on some drums, or he was like just hitting some sticks up against a thing, and they were like, "You'll do." And just transform
it's a shame that this isn't like my own campaign now, because I could take these thoughts and just like, oh, I'm writing this in. So I have a question for anyone listening. If you have ever run a module or have thought about writing it or have played in one, are there things that you find you take away from it that you would do differently or would like to improve upon, or maybe ways that you change it to suit your needs better as a DM or as a player?
Yeah. How would you personally improve a module, basically? Yeah, we can take that. We will leave that up to everyone listening, and feel free to catch us in Discord or over on socials if you would like to, or you can even email us, fine, if you have any thoughts on that. Or leave a voice clip.
knockdown@gmail.com.
Yeah.
To leave a voice clip, you actually have to make an account with Anchor. I found that out from Datum.
Oh, interesting to know. If you do use Anchor, though, for your podcasting, you can do it over there. So
yeah. So if you also want to send a voice clip and do it via email or Google Drive and give us that as well, we can do that as well. Because Datum had tried to send us a voice clip before, and it did not send because he didn't have an account with it at the time. So yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yep.
Up next on the show, we are going to do a little delving deeper. And on this episode of Delving Deeper, we are going this segment of Delving Deeper, we're going to find out why it's not a whole show in itself. But also, we're going to be talking about Ludonarrative Dissonance. That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful and a half.
It certainly is, and a lot.
Now, I vaguely remember you telling me what this is, but for everybody else at home that also doesn't remember what the hell this is, I would love if you explained.
Certainly. I will do what I can to explain it, but basically, dissonance is like the divide. When you hear people talk about cognitive dissonance, it's similar to that, where like one thing seems to contradict the other. Ludonarrative dissonance is a term that was originally, as far as we can tell, originally brought up by a game designer named Clint Hawking back in like 2007. He had an article that was talking about it in BioShock as an example, which is probably a good place to start. But also Uncharted has been brought up in a lot of other games. But basically, here's the division that comes into play. I am the hero of the story, and I'm the good guy, and I'm there to save the world, but in the meantime, while I'm in the middle of that, I kill so many people. Just like blatantly just shooting everybody whatsoever.
Another example would be Batman, who does not kill people and refuses to kill people, but leaves them grievously injured and probably with severe life-threatening injuries.
Yes. And let's face it, there are people, like if you played the Arkham games, because technically Batman didn't kill anybody in the Arkham games.
Technically.
But, like, when you get to Arkham Knight and you get the Batmobile and you're just shooting off, like, missiles, that non-lethal missiles or whatever, and there's stuff I'm sorry, like, when he bashes somebody's head into a wall, or they just fall down smashes a dumpster or something, I don't think they're getting back up.
No.
In case you're wondering why it's called that, though, it's actually because it's a compound word, ludonarrative, between ludology and narrative. Ludology refers to ludic elements, or gameplay, basically. So these are the actual interactive gameplay elements. These are referred to as ludic elements. Yeah, we learn something every day.
Breaking that word down into 5 different parts.
The more you know. So, ludo, and then narrative. So basically this is the divide between the gameplay and the narrative.
I thought Ludonarrative was just a narrative in the songs by the band Ludo.
That is also accurate, but not the one we're talking about today. But ludonarrative dissonance is just that. It is when you have something that does not really gel between the gameplay and the narrative that's being told. So Uncharted is a good example of that. I think you'd probably agree that a lot of games that we play probably have this issue in one way or another.
Probably.
Where you're listening to, like, the narrative and the cutscenes are going and they're telling a story, and then you get into the gameplay and it seems to be inferring a very different version of events.
Definitely a lot of games. I can think of 2 right now offhand that don't have that issue, which are Shadow of War / Shadow of Mordor, where you're killing Urukais. That's a little different because there's clear distinction there between what you're doing as being the thing that you're supposed to be doing and not.
Right.
And then the other one was actually Cyberpunk, because you're kind of doing things for the police in part of it, and cleaning up like gang crimes and stuff. It's a little different, but it's you're not like, oh, I'm the good guy saving the world. It's like, I'm cleaning up Night City.
Yeah, exactly. Cyberpunk really does have the thing where they don't really give you the illusion that you're the good guy anyway. So
no, you're doing a heist, okay. Anyway, so
yeah, but that does happen. But I've played my fair share of the Uncharted and the BioShock games, and they do cast you as characters that are maybe in desperate straits, but are supposed to be like the generally good folks that are trying to save things. But then it gets into a little bit of a harder time, and I think it's why BioShock was the first example that was brought up with this idea. Okay, so when you get down into Rapture, right, you're kind of presented with this very dystopic view of a world apart. Objectivism went way off the rails. And so when you get in there, there's obviously people that are coming at you and trying to kill you, like the Splicers. And you do take them on, and you can kind of understand that. But then you're also given options, like when it comes to the little what is it? The big daddies and the little sisters. And you have the options, even though you're the hero of the story. Do you just want to kill the little sisters so you can harvest their atom and become more powerful? You have that option. Would you like to take it? Like, you start getting some real options about whether you are going to leave people alive or you're just going to simply kill them. And it's just out of the gate. Does not improve in later versions of the series. Uncharted, again. Nathan Drake is supposed to be an explorer. He's trying to find lost treasure. Yeah, he runs across mercenaries that might be trying to kill him, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he has to then go into a place and just start mowing people down all over the place. Lara Croft also occasionally has this problem with Tomb Raider. Exploring lost tombs. Okay.
Yeah, archaeologists have a really dangerous profession, apparently.
It really is. It really is. One thing that I liked is, I guess you could say that there's a bit of this, at least a cognitive dissonance in movies as well, like even in like Indiana Jones, because again, he's a professor of archaeology, and now we're in like these scenarios where he just shoots somebody. But one thing I did appreciate about that story is that a lot of times it's just like, he just leans his head back, bumps somebody off of the tank, and then they roll under the tank. It's like, uh-oh, sorry. Whoops. I didn't really do that intentionally. I'm sorry.
Listen, I just need you to know that archaeologists are the people that will solve all of the world's major issues.
This is true. They'll find all of these ancient artifacts that will probably kill us, and then make sure no one ever finds them.
They'll put them in your museum.
It belongs in a museum.
It belongs in a museum.
It certainly does. But way too many of those stories really do revolve around, wow, I found this ancient civilization. Oh, wow, there's an ancient relic. And then the resolution to it is, no one should ever find this ever again. Because this was a mistake. It was a mistake.
On that topic, it's not really the Ludonarrative dissonance part, but on that one specific thing, I want a follow-up game. A sequel to a game where you find an artifact, realize it should never be touched and found again, and then a follow-up game where someone goes and finds it again.
Yes. Let's do that. Let's absolutely do that. Yeah. This has been the conversation that's come up with a lot of adventure games. RPGs have a tendency to have this issue, and it's a little hard to justify. Sometimes you get around it by being like more of a high fantasy sort of thing where, you know, okay, the undead are coming at you. What are you gonna do? You know, it's like, what are you gonna do?
I think we actually had a moment of something similar in our D&D game.
Sure.
Where Ray's fighter was like, yeah, I'm just gonna shoot the gnome. It's like, okay, but are you gonna shoot the gnome?
Yeah.
Was your character, who is trying to help the common folk, shoot this just rock gnome for almost a reason? Yes, it's kind of self-defense, but the other two party members were not shooting at the gnome, they were shooting at the device it was sitting on.
Right.
To destroy that. And she's like, maybe I won't do that.
Yeah. Granted, the end resolution did not work out very well for the gnome.
Granted, the gnome ended up getting eaten by the mimic, so...
The mimic that we didn't find the first time, and the rock gnome that we tied up after incapacitating.
Yes.
With a sleep spell, for the record. Yeah. Whoopsie, but it was not intentional.
Unintentionally, food. Anyways.
Yes. But that is actually where we should probably have more of a discussion, because you mentioned that in the D&D game, and this does happen a lot in tabletop, and I think that the term that we typically talk about is murder hobo. This idea, I
don't know if that happens a lot.
Yeah.
It's brought up a lot, but I don't know personally that games people play in generally have that issue as often as it is brought up.
I see. I mean, I have been in some campaigns, maybe more than one, I can't remember, where your heroes end up getting a lot of people killed and the whole town's on fire when you leave. And you kind of have to leave because it's on fire.
Okay, well, I guess it depends on the reason that things go south really fast. And I guess it also would determine, the morality of, like, what your party is doing and who the people that your party is fighting are and what they're doing.
Sure.
It's a lot less clear, I think, in a tabletop game without knowledge of all the sides, so the DM could be the ultimate arbiter for that. The video game, it's a lot more clear that painted as you are the hero in most cases of that. Unless it's a game like you're portrayed as a hero, but it turns out you're not the hero.
Yeah.
That's not as often though, because that's turning a trope on its head.
Sure. Yeah, I'd actually think that it would be really fun, really interesting, if at the end of like campaigns, they just like had somebody sit down with you and make sure that you didn't actually break a ton of laws and and kill a lot. They actually had that happen in Telltale Games Walking Dead. There was a whole thing where you're playing Lee for the entire game, and you're making some hard choices, like, okay, who's gonna live and who's gonna die, and am I gonna shoot these people, and am I gonna steal this food because it might be somebody's food, we don't know. I had to make some choices, and at the end of those episodes, a guy who's been watching you this entire time, who's been like in the shadows watching and observing what you've done, sits you down at a table and questions you about the decisions you made, and you have to justify the actions that you took to him because he has a gun on you. And you have to justify basically that you're still a good person after all of this.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah.
Might be harder with D&D or a tabletop game. I think if you were to like give every decision they have, like mark it down, like have a list of things they can do, mark down every time they do a certain thing, you could do it. But again, that would be very granular.
You want to have like a list of sins and virtues, and like every time you do something, it's like it's like weighing your soul for the end of your life, the weights and measures of your humanity.
Maybe at the end of the game you're visited by an avatar of a god, and depending what virtues you've shown over the course of the game, it depends what avatar visits you.
Or this might really work well for like paladins, clerics, or warlocks, anything that has like a patron or a god that they answer to, where there might actually be like a large spirit or creature that might be asking, "Hey, are you still on the path that you were supposed to be on? Because you're getting your power through me, bud. So
yeah,
what are you doing?" I can understand that as an interesting story beat, because, obviously tabletop games are more narratively driven than, let's say, a video game typically. But I don't know. I think that it's worth considering, especially if it's something like that could actually be observing, or a big brother character kind of doing so, or someone in your party who just wants to be observing. I remember in what was it? Knights of the Old Republic 2. One of the characters that's around and it can go on your quest and can then also murder a bunch of people with you is Kreia. But Kreia, being this sort of older grade Jedi essentially, will often on the ship discuss decisions that you've made and have you justify them to determine if you've done the right thing, whether you've done the light side or dark side options, whether you've saved somebody or you have cast them out, will make a note to talk to you about that decision and determine, did you think that was the right course of action, and what are the possible ramifications of the thing that you did. Even if, and this was the fun part, even if somebody comes up and says, "Can I please have some credits? My my daughter is dying and I need some credits, and you go, okay, here you go, here's some credits. She'll come in afterward and go, really, do you think that was a wise idea? Because I think what you just did is made him a target for all of the criminals.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then you see the thing, and it's like the criminals then, oh, he has money, and then beats him up and takes his credit, and you're like, oh, okay, so, yeah, all of these things that I do have larger ramifications. But it would be harder to justify that you were the good guy if you were just like, no, punch, and then take their money.
Yeah. It's well, that's the great thing about the Gray Jedi and that specific, the gray morality there is that every action has a consequence.
Yes.
So you may think you're doing a good action, but the consequence to that action may be negative.
Yes, it is.
So you do a good thing for someone, but the good thing you do for that person ends up being a negative for them.
Right. And games like Knights of the Old Republic actually try to keep track of that, because you have the light-dark mechanic, where things that you do actually influence your character at large. Fable tried to quantify that as well, but I always found, and I remember having these conversations with people with Fable, is that the quantifying of that morality becomes kind of weird. Like, you go out to the bandits and you'll get some good boy points if you kill the bandits. But kill people in town and you'll get the bad boy points. But if you figure it out, like, you start thinking about, if I steal an apple, it's 2 evil points if I steal the apple. If I kill a townsperson, it's 5 evil points. So, if I'm trying to figure this out, killing 2 townspeople is equivalent of stealing 5 apples.
Yeah.
Okay. That also, you're the hero of the story regardless, so
right.
You're either the evil hero or the good hero.
Well, that's one of those things too, where morality systems are really kind of an antiquated part of gaming.
Sure.
Just like alignment has kind of gone away for D&D for the most part as well. It's really not heavily cared about. For instance, in a lot of game systems, it's the morality system and alignment type systems have just kind of not been favorable as much in recent years.
Yeah. I can kind of, I actually think that when it came to the alignment system in D&D, you know, your chaotic, neutral, lawful, and then like your evil and good or neutral, that whole system, I think the bigger problem, beyond being like generally good, because you kind of figure most of your characters are going to be aligned with good or neutral, not necessarily evil, I think it actually becomes really tricky for characters that might be labeled as the evil characters, because then how do I do anything that might be morally right in the game at all?
I think it also takes away from playing a character to play the character versus playing a character to play in alignment.
Right, because you're no longer asking... I think we've actually talked about this on the last show, but the idea that you essentially are creating a dialogue where I'm no longer thinking about who my character is, but I've determined that my alignment is going to determine who I should be.
Right. Instead of being like, oh, this person cares a lot about this thing and less about this. So maybe they're willing to kill if they can justify the reason they're doing it.
Right.
Or maybe they're willing to steal, but they're stealing to, like, Robin Hood style, steal from the, rich, do a bad thing, but to give to people who need it to do a good thing. So it's complex. It's more complex than just the morality trees and the alignment charts are. I think we've gotten a little bit away from ludonarrative dissonance, however.
We probably have gotten a little far away, although maybe not, because generally the idea of the narrative and the gameplay not adding up, actually this does actually kind of work with that. Because
good.
Yeah, don't worry, we actually haven't gotten away from it. Because what we're talking about is that the gameplay might not actually align to the storyline itself. So, and that is exactly what the point is. It's not necessarily just about the idea of becoming a murderous, rampaging video game character, while talking about how, I need to save a lot of people. But it can also mean really any choices that you can make in gameplay that don't really add up to the story itself, because we have a contradiction between these two things. In general, if you're running a game, or if you're making a game for that matter, do we really need to create a system to justify this, or is this really more of a player experience issue where the player has to write this in their heads?
Yeah, I don't think game systems really need that as like a hard set rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unless you're trying to do something like, hey, we're gonna do Ludonarrative Dissonance, or like specifically call it out, be like, your player's a hero, but they're also going to be the like villain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think there's a specific example I can think of for that, so.
Sure. Another thing that is also worth mentioning that a lot of games do when it comes to Ludonarrative Dissonance, I think, is that you can play characters that are not immortal, but are very much human, and somehow can take so many bullets to the face before you die.
Yeah, that's not Ludonarrative Dissonance, that's just games.
That's just how games work.
Yep.
But
hell, you jump on Mario's head and he just shrinks.
Yeah! You jump on Mario's head, you jump on the enemies in Mario, and they just lay flat and turn into coins.
Yeah, it's weird how that works.
I don't know.
We should have that happen in D&D.
That would be amazing. Oh my
yeah,
God.
you slay the mimic and it just dissolves into a stack of coins.
We could do the Scott Pilgrim thing. We take on our enemies and they just burst into coins at the end.
Yes, exactly.
Let's do that.
Perfect.
Let's do that, folks. Finally on the show, we have one more thing, and this is something that's probably going to take a little bit of explanation, Alex, because
good.
Explain
me the things.
I told you what it was, but it leads a lot to the imagination. So yes, exactly. I couldn't hear you, but I imagine you were miming.
It's just the rainbow with imagination.
Oh yeah,
you can add that in post.
Perfect. I love that. More work. I love that. So we were talking about Uncharted, but if we were talking about BioShock or Fallout, you'll probably experience this. I wanted to talk a little bit about setting up that moment that I have referred to as the Welcome to Jurassic Park moment. What that basically is that moment where we go from sort of a regimented, corridored world, where we're kind of being introduced to some framework of what we are in, to the moment where all of a sudden it just opens up, and you kind of see the full scope of what your game is.
Is that like Fallout 3 when you leave the vault?
That's right. That would be what I refer to as Welcome to Jurassic Park.
And you see the wasteland, or when you leave the vault in Fallout 4 and see again the wasteland.
The wasteland. After you had been introduced to a small section of it, you saw sort of like the world before, and then when you come back up and you get introduced to this as your actual landscape that has been destroyed. New Vegas, it's actually the moment you leave Doc Mitchell's house, because you're introduced to Good Springs.
And then Skyrim would be the moment you leave the cave.
It's after the cave. It's that
or it's the moment you leave Bleak Falls Barrow and you see the rest of Skyrim right in front of you from atop the mountain.
You might think of it that way. BioShock actually kind of made this like a thing in basically all the games, where Andrew Ryan is explaining to you basically why he made Rapture as you're descending down. And then all of a sudden, from those cards and from that, you hear him say, and thus I created Rapture. And the second you hear Rapture, you suddenly go from this like elevator shaft and see out into the world, and you now see the entirety of Rapture. And in Infinite, they do the same thing, but in a different way, where you go into the lighthouse, and you get catapulted up into the sky, and you go through the cloud level, and then after you get through the cloud level, the sun comes down on top of you, and you see Columbia in its entirety.
I think I understand the welcome to Jurassic Park moment.
Right, because I thought to myself, every time I see that, I do think about that moment in Jurassic Park, where, like, they open the doors, and all of a sudden, the theme song comes in, and the brontosauruses are all over the place, and it's like...
Yeah, it's the reveal.
It's the reveal. That moment. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because some games have done it pretty well, and I would argue that maybe some games haven't. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those examples.
So I'm gonna guess it has to be dependent on the genre of the game. Open world or adventure games probably have a better time doing that, I'd assume, and maybe some RPGs,
right,
than say your strategy games and your similar simulation type games.
Yeah. I think it does have to lend itself a little bit. Open world or sandbox games are going to be more prone to have this moment just because there is an open landscape to go to. But for that matter, I'm trying to think that if I were looking at even my walking sims or my narrative games, sometimes they
those as well can have a same feel.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, which is also just a really great game if you've never played it. But What Remains of Edith Finch, and there is, although it's very subtle, they don't really announce it so much. The start of the game is where you are walking down this road that leads to the Finch house, which is a very eclectic house. If you're familiar with just the graphics on the box art, you can tell that it's just a really oddly built out house for every single room for every member of the family. You don't really see it so well when you're up the road and sort of in the woods. But then as you kind of approach the house and get closer to it, the woods sort of peel back a little bit, and you can actually see more of the entirety of the house. And it's when you actually walk up to the doors and start to see the enormity of it that you kind of get that reveal that this is where we're going to be spending the game. Even though it is far more regimented, and for the most part after that has you crawling through individual corridors in the house, they do take that one little moment where you can actually see the entirety of the building. You know, you can kind of make it out from there. I would make an argument that some Fallout games have done this far better than others.
Sure, definitely.
Because I actually thought they did a great job with New Vegas when you actually leave Doc Mitchell's house. You've gotten a little bit of explanation of the world, and you open the door, and the next scene you see, there's a bright light that hits you, that I always appreciate, where it's like your eyes are adjusting to the wasteland, and when it fades away, and you can actually see clearly, you've been presented with a lot of information right up at the front. You're seeing all of Good Springs. You see Victor just moving along on his little wheel right across the road. There's tumbleweeds. You see all of the buildings. You can kind of see New Vegas in the background all the way over there. There's this roller coaster thing up the road. You're being presented with a whole lot of information right out of the gate for the first time. I would say that they did that better in New Vegas than they did it in 3, just because when you leave the cave, and when you leave the vault in 3, it might be a while since you played, but basically, you know, your eyes still adjust. It does that moment where things are a little blurry, but there's still quite a bit of cave around you. Like, it's set into the mountain.
Right.
And so your vision is actually much more limited. You only have about this kind of scope of the wasteland the second you get out there. In New Vegas, they have like this kind of scope all around you. 4 does an okay job of it, but
kinda. I mean,
I don't see.
You kind of see a bit of Boston first, but then when you come out, you actually see like the rest of it.
Yeah. I think the one problem that they have with Fallout 4 when they actually have that moment, the reveal, is that it's not that interesting on face value. You're through the trees, like the trees are all over the place. And so I'm kind of seeing a little bit of Concord. I think it's Concord. That's like the first place that you see.
Yeah, see, for Fallout 4 would be a little bit more dynamic, I think, if you exited a different location than you entered the vault.
Yeah, that would have been helpful.
Like, if you entered the vault through like the side of a mountain, maybe you came out on a different entrance, like a helipad up top.
That would be good.
So you're like more up. I know Boston doesn't really have mountains in it.
No.
So bear with us. But
Yeah.
like maybe you came out at a lookout tower or something like that, so you could see a bigger like view of the land of just the devastation from that.
Yeah, that would have been very helpful. Because unfortunately, yeah, with 4, I say it did an okay job just because I can see all around me. I'm getting like lifted up into the world. But then when I actually get lifted up into the world, I can't really see much. There's just a lot of obstruction, and
Yeah, and that's just kind of bland.
It is. I don't know if it's just a problem with doing post-apocalypses, where it's like things are kind of gray, and maybe it's not so, impressive when you.
Right.
But
It's kind of like if you were to come out and you're suddenly you're in a desert. It's like, okay, well, cool. The reveal is nice because I'm just suddenly walking out into a desert, like in Fallout 3, I guess, or New Vegas. But it's sand. It's a lot of sand.
Yep. Yeah.
Boy, look at all that sand.
Yeah. Look, there's a broken down car. Cool. We got that going on. It's not necessarily so impressive in that regard. We've played quite a few of the Elder Scrolls games. They always do have that moment, to varying effects of usefulness.
Yeah, usually it's right after you escape from prison.
Yep, you've escaped from a prison, and now you have to go out into the world. It's true. Basically, almost every Elder Scrolls game is you're escaping from prison of some kind.
Right.
I don't know if it worked very well in, like, Oblivion, because when you kind of, like, leave the prison, it's like just there's some water.
Yeah, I think the one thing you can see is, like, the spire.
I think you
in
might be able to
Cyrodiil.
see the spire, yeah. But it's very minimal. Like,
Yeah.
they don't do a terrific job there. Skyrim, you're really seeing the road when you leave the cave, so not so much. I would actually say out of the 3, like, main Bethesda ones, like the 3D ones that we're used to, I don't know. I think Morrowind might have actually worn it better in this
Maybe.
case, because in Morrowind you're on the boat. You kind of like make your character on the boat, and then when you leave the boat, you see this whole starting area with the niche over here at the post, and these buildings and all these people around, and you're like, oh wow, okay, there's so many places I can go now. There's so much stuff I can do. So there is that. I keep thinking about it, I think, mostly just because when I look at games now, I'm curious as to when they're going to have that moment.
Yeah.
Or if they're ever going to get to that point. What they consider to be that point. Right now, I went back to playing, I should say, Horizon Zero Dawn. That's an open world. I feel like they wanted to have multiple instances of that when you get into different areas, where you're kind of getting that reveal. But ironically, I think one of the first places where it does that and stops being a linear path that's kind of taking you through and holding your hand to a place that's brand new is not when you're getting revealed to the world, but when you actually fall down into a cave. Because there's a point where Aloy's really young, that kind of sets up the whole story, where you're learning some basics, and you're being held by the hand and going down a road. It's very basic stuff. And then she falls into this cave. And when you get into the cave, you're going through some little passageways, and after you get out of those passageways, though, you see a more open cave system, but also one that has a ton of this old technology that you're not supposed to go and explore. They kind of set up this idea that in this world, these places are forbidden. You're not supposed to go into these caves because this is technology that led essentially to, like, the ruin of mankind. So, and somebody must know that. So now you got all these glowing lights and all of this ancient tech that you don't understand, and all of a sudden it's just being revealed to you in a moment after you kind of like crawl through a little chasm. You kind of get into this much larger thing, and it's subtle and it's underground, but it's sort of in that vein of doing a reveal. Now, when you have a game, I don't know if you've played any recently that had that moment. I don't know if like Lost Ark or Pokemon happened to do something like that.
Pokemon kind of has that. I think when you leave the village for the first time, they have the look at the area in front of you. It's just vast open wilderness kind of deal.
Sure. That's good. In the older Pokemon games, they really just, it's like you leave Pallet Town or something like in the first one.
Yeah.
It's supposed to open up a little bit more. I don't know if necessarily you get the cinematic grandeur of it so as much. Actually, the Ascent did a really good job of it, I thought.
Did they?
Well, because it's subtle. They do a subtle job of it, but if you're thinking about it, you can appreciate it. Because they'll do a change of angle. You start out in what they call the Stinkworks, I think is what they call it. It's the underbelly of the city, the underbelly of this world. And so you're going through these corridors, it's just steam vents and these little ghoul dudes that are coming and hitting you. And you get up to the first level, basically, the main level of the game. And when you're going along that corridor, it pans out over the entire city. And so now you're seeing the just sheer amount of assets that they were willing to put into this game. And kind of get this shock of just how much is in that world. And there's moments when you're kind of going along there where, you know, it kind of pans so that you can see more of the actual city itself rather than the top-down view. The first place I think it actually reveals that is when you're coming up to this giant corridor where you have a few options to go to before you get there in the Stinkworks. And the camera just goes from the top-down view and then goes, like, if you're here and the camera's up here, it just goes whoop, like right in back of you so that you can see out in front of you. And I think that that's a really interesting idea. They do it several times in the game when you get out onto balconies or something like that. Or if you're going down a corridor and they want you to see on the side, so it's almost more side-scrolly at that moment, they will change that perspective for you to kind of give you more of the cinematic scope of what you're getting into.
Gotcha.
What I am wondering, though, is if we apply this to a tabletop game...
Well, that's hard because there's no visuals.
There's no visuals. Exactly. So how the heck am I supposed to set up some grand
You have
vision?
to do a really well-written description.
Yeah. Okay.
Description, environmental details, and like sensory details are what you would need for tabletop to do that.
Right. Because I feel like the narrative part of that is sort of like after maybe the first quest or something and you get into like an actual hub area, trying to kind of like make that hub area interesting, like trying to make it something. In Psychonauts 2, they do that where you start off the game in one particular level, and Psychonauts levels are a little bit linear in the way that they are built. When you get out of that, really the first place that they put you is in the Psychonauts headquarters. And the second you go in there, you kind of like go up the little elevator shaft, there's just a ton of people, and they're floating around, and there's platforms all over the place. And I can imagine that it's a little hard to actually describe that, like I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
And make it as impactful as if there were graphics and sound design and all of these elements that are being brought into the picture as that. Do you think... Because I've never built a game.
Me either.
I have never designed a game. But I wonder how much that moment factors into the actual presentation of the game for people. If that's something that they thought about.
For tabletop or for video games?
Well, as you said, tabletop is a hard one because you have to be able to develop the actual narrative. I'm thinking about video games at the moment. Because
When video games, the ones that pay attention to it, they pay attention to it.
Yeah. Because if I'm thinking about it as much as I am, I wonder, there must be a conscientious decision to do that.
Yeah, for the games that do it,
mm-hmm.
It is conscious. For the games that don't do it, it's not.
Right.
Pretty easy distinction there.
Sure. So I guess when it comes to the tabletop, like we were talking about, have you seen any resources, since we're looking at modules and stuff like that, where they actually try to accomplish that? Or I think because of the medium, it might be something that they kind of punt?
Well, I haven't really been looking for it, so I haven't found any resources. But I think you could do it. You'd have to have you'd want to evoke sensory details, and you'd want to try to evoke some emotion from the scene you're trying to display. Like if you're trying to show a city of splendor, be like, you could be like, the winds and the crystal spires, and seeing the sun glisten through the glass of the city brings a tear to your eye as you have give them something to connect it with, maybe. That way they can have even if it's just in character, an emotional response attached to it.
Sure. That
might help. But otherwise I'm not entirely sure, because you'd have to write it in such a way that you'd basically need to be an author.
Sure.
Who knows what the hell they're doing.
Right.
To evoke that kind of response in mental imagery.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is harder if you're trying to present that for multiple people at the same time, because all of the examples that I just gave about that moment is for single-player experiences in video games, not for multiplayer experiences where you might be with 5 different people.
Yeah, it's a bit harder when you're trying to do it to a varied audience.
Right.
So,
because what we're kind of talking about is the curated aspect of an experience.
Well, I think in that case too, you don't aim it at the characters themselves, you aim it at the players.
Yes. Yes. And this does speak more to the world building aspect, where you're trying to give a lot of information about that world very quickly. So yeah, you kind of have to be able to describe it very well if you don't have the resources available. Or, hopefully, maybe there's art. Maybe there's a piece of art. You can just show people, this is the city we're in.
Right.
Wow. And right over the largest building in the city, you see, "Welcome to Jurassic Park."
There you go. Legally non-distinct Jurassic Park ripoff.
Welcome to Triassic Adventure.
Welcome to Cretaceous Plaza.
Welcome to Cretaceous Pleistocene Plaza.
There you go, perfect.
There we go. All right. So I think that should do it for this episode. We've talked about many things. Possibly competently, I don't know.
Who knows?
However, if anyone would like to find more information about Total Pebble Knockdown, Alex, where could they go?
To Cretaceous Plaza. Can't say that word. Go to Cretaceous Plaza. Go to totalpebbleknockdown.com.
That's right. You can find all the totals, the pebbles, and the knockdowns over there. While you are on the site, feel free to check out our Patreon. We do full versions of these videos.
And for just $2 a month, if we get at least 10 people doing it, Nathan will do an exclusive Orbital episode for you.
Okay, fine.
There, I just made it $40 goal for you to do.
There we go. Yeah, if we get 10 patrons at a $2
at
$2
level,
at $2 level, I guess I'll do a. I guess I'll start doing some Orbital episodes. I guess at that point, I guess I'll do some Orbital episodes. We'll see. I'm not.
There is a goal right there.
Yep, we're trying to figure out. Yeah, trying to figure out goals. I guess that's one of them. I personally I can't guarantee their quality, but I'll tell you that that's something I will do. I'll make the promise now.
Don't make the promise. I was just kidding.
Haha, April Fool's early.
Yes.
Anyway, if you would like to listen to the show or make sure that you are signed up for the show, you can find us on every single podcast app known to mankind. And as we mentioned earlier, if you would like to leave voice clips and you are signed into Anchor, you can do so over there, and we'll check on those for follow-up on these episodes. You can also find us on social media, many of them. I am at Citanium.
I am at EXP Limited, and the show is over at Pebble Knockdown.
So you can find us over there, and if you have any questions about the show, you can ask us. It's okay. If it's a constructive question, that's always good.
Or if it's just something silly.
Or if it's just something silly. And also, if you have longer thoughts, we do have a Discord. People who do have longer thoughts on the episodes have a tendency to drop them over there in episode discussions. So
we appreciate them. They are fun to read.
They are better thought out than our episodes are here. And they're more in depth too. So you might actually want to join us on the Discord channel just so that you can see more in-depth analysis than we even planned.
People who are better than we are.
People who are better than we are. Some of them are our patrons already. So, thank you so much for joining us on Cretaceous Pork. And it is closed right now because they ate the original hosts.
Perfect.
Yep. Dinosaurs came, ate the original hosts. There was a rock slide. That actually would make more sense. We gotta do a theme park next. That's a Patreon tier. Total Park. Total Park. Knockdown.
The park's closed with a K.
The park's closed with a K.
Yep.
Now we just need to find a place to hang that sign and we'll just put it up someplace. The park's closed. With just like a dinosaur, but the dinosaur. Just dinosaur in the background. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye for now.
Bye.